Art class with Miss Bancroft at home. Hi Suitor artists! Today is drawing day, Wednesday, and today I'm going to do a little demonstration on how to use value when you're defining forms. So that basically means how to use shading or value to make something look more realistic. And we touched on this a little bit in the still life video, but this is a kind of simplified version of how to give a form value, how to turn something flat into something more three-dimensional. So here's a little example of some forms of a sphere, a cone, a cylinder, and a cube. And I'm just going to show you step by step how to add value to those to make them look more three-dimensional. So have fun! For this video, all you need is an eraser, a sharpener, and a pencil. Okay, so now that we have the outlines of these basic forms, this is a circle that will be turned into a sphere, a cone shape, a cylinder shape, and a cube shape. What we have to do is we have to start thinking about, on each of these shapes, where the light source is coming from. So I'm just going to start each one individually. I'm going to draw an imaginary light source. And this is like a pretend little lamp shining on this big circle that will be a sphere. So if the light is shining on this side of the sphere, this will be the brightest part of the sphere. Then the darkest shadow will always be the opposite of where the light source is. So I'm just going to start lightly shading in. So if the light source is shining here, the shadow of the sphere is going to be off to the side, opposite of where the light source is. And then one thing that happens next to the drop shadow is often there's a reflection from the table that's just a little bit lighter where that ball touches the table. So I'm going to keep darkening in those shadows. And then as I go up, as I'm shading, this shadow is going to get lighter and lighter. So I'm going to kind of press lighter and lighter with my pencil. And if you're making hash marks like I am, you can make fewer and fewer hash marks. You can kind of blend as you go. Oftentimes the drop shadow is darker, closer to the object, and it gets lighter as it moves away. And then one trick that artists use is if you put in the background of an object, that can kind of define the outline. Because really, if you're looking at a sphere, you're not going to see an outline like it has an actual circle. You're just going to see the values. So by adding in the background, you're also adding in that upper edge. So as you can see, this ball shape has kind of turned into a, the circle shape has turned into a sphere just by adding value. and taking your time with that. Last thing is I'm going to pop in that highlight, make sure it's extra bright. Get a little bit of that highlight down here. And that highlight's not super bright, just a little reflection. All right, so that's our sphere. Same thing with the cone. We're going to imagine that there's a little light source shining on the cone. So if you can imagine that there's a light source, this side of the cone, this whole flat side, is going to be the brightest part of the cone, and this area on the opposite side of the light source will be the darkest. So I'll start by adding a little bit of value to the opposite side of that cone. And then if you can imagine where the drop shadow is, it's going to be opposite of the light source. So just like the sphere, although this one might be a little bit of a different shape since this is a cone shape. And the shadow gets lighter as it moves away. I'm going to smudge it and make those edges a little bit smudgy. And then I'm going to continue adding some value into the cone. Again, just pressing a little lighter, making less marks. Smudging it in. Adding a little darker value here. And then I'm going to use my eraser to erase that highlight a little bit. Erase out some of that value. And just like I did with the sphere, I'm going to add in a little bit of value into the background, because we don't really ever see outlines when we look at forms. We just see the value of what's behind it with the value of the actual object. Alright, so now we have that basic cone shape. I'm going to erase those highlights out, make sure they're nice and bright, and let's move on to the cylinder. Same thing, light source. We're imagining it's coming from that upper right corner. That means this is going to be the brightest part, and down here, opposite the light source, will be the darkest part. So let's start adding a little bit of value into that opposite area. And as I'm making my lines for each of these objects, notice that I'm not making lines straight across, because that would kind of flatten out the image. What I'm trying to do is make my lines along kind of the imaginary surface of that object. So I know that the lines would kind of curve like this, parallel with this line. So as I shade, I'm adding my lines in kind of parallel to that shape. I'm going to erase a little bit out here because it's getting kind of dark. We want to have a range of values where it goes from darkest to lightest. So I'm going to darken this area in a little bit more on that side edge. And I'm going to add in my drop shadow. Again, opposite the light source. I'm going to add a little bit of value to the background, help that top line define itself, and also that side line. I'm gonna draw in just a little edge of the table, kind of an imaginary table. That way we can kind of show the different values. So these objects are kind of resting on the table, so I'm gonna give this darker value behind, and then we can have kind of a lighter wash of a value on the table. It's very seldom, or it doesn't really happen very often, that you'll see a bright white, like a perfect white color, except for where those very intense highlights are. So even when you think that something's really bright, usually it has a little bit of value. So it's nice to add those in. All right, last shape is our cube. So we're imagining that light source, same thing. The upper right corner, that means, will be the brightest part, and then the opposite here, lower left corner, will be the darkest. So let's start in that lower left. Now the surfaces of a cube are flat, so the way that I'm drawing my lines or my shading is straight across, just flat. You don't have to worry about flattening out the shape because it's flat. Darker towards the object, lighter as it moves away. Smudge those edges a little bit. I'm going to add the little table surface. Add a little bit of value in the background. All right, add a little bit of value to that table, give it a wash, and voila. Okay, hi Suitor artists. I hope you all had a good time adding value to your forms, to making those three-dimensional shapes. If you finished this, I would love to see what you're working on, so feel free to send or share with me, and I'll see you next time. Art class.